Hello and welcome to the YYC Soccer Podcast. My name is Jason Kmet and my co-host is Scott Strasser. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Jason. Episode 20 this week, so another milestone for the YYC Soccer Podcast. It feels pretty good to hit that milestone.
Yeah, I don't know what the stats are, but I think we've definitely passed. A lot of podcasts don't make it to 20, so I feel pretty good about that.
That's great, and excited to continue chatting about soccer in Calgary for another 20 episodes.
Yeah, sounds good. So if you are a new listener to the YYC Soccer Podcast, what is it all about, Scott?
So as mentioned, we do focus on soccer in Calgary at the amateur, collegiate, and professional levels. We talk about the teams and the players from the city's soccer community, from the grassroots and amateur leagues up to the university and professional level.
This episode, we have a few topics. We're going to talk a bit about the Cavs match last week against Forge. We'll also preview the match on Friday evening against Valor. We're going to do an interview this week with Sean Clarke, who is with the Foot Soldiers. Then I got sort of down a bit of a Google research rabbit hole and found out a bunch of stuff. We're going to talk a little bit about Calgarians that were playing in League One BC this year.
Yeah, so it's another fairly Cavalry heavy episode. We've had a few of those lately, especially now that League One Alberta has wrapped up. But it was good that we managed to secure an interview that is a little bit different from the others that we've done so far. And I think listeners will be able to appreciate it.
We had a chance to interview Sean Clarke, and Sean is one of the founding members of the Foot Soldiers. If you're not aware, the Foot Soldiers are the largest supporters group for the Cavs. You can see them every match. They're behind the goal. They're singing, dancing, setting off smoke, doing chants. And then they're also right by where the players enter and leave the pitch. So that always makes it a little bit interesting as well.
Yeah, I think most of our listeners probably know who the Foot Soldiers are, but I imagine most probably aren't aware of their backstory. So that's why it was great to talk to Sean. Foot Soldiers are now a supporters group that is more than 8 years old. And Sean was one of the original 6 who co-founded the group back in 2015, following a kind of casual pub meetup among soccer fans in the lead up to Foothills' inaugural PDL season. And they grew quickly in the next few years. And in 2019, with the arrival of the CPL, they pivoted more toward supporting Cavalry. And now they're seen as a pretty major and pretty invested stakeholder in the club's story. They get brought up by the players and by the coaches nearly every press conference I've been to. So definitely a big name in Calgary soccer. And it's cool to hear a little bit more about where they came from and where they're going.
Yeah, so let's run that interview now. I'd like to welcome Sean Clarke to the podcast. Sean is one of the original Foot Soldiers members and is one of the key organizers in the group. And we wanted to bring him on to talk a little bit about the Foot Soldiers. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about the origins of the Foot Soldiers?
So there was, back in 2014, when Foothills announced their exhibition series, there was some talk of a supporters group in Calgary started. And they met throughout the exhibition series, and I was kind of waiting for it to crystallize a little bit as that first season came about. One night I decided, I'm going to start a Twitter account and kind of see where it goes. And I went for dinner with my wife, and I came back, and there were quite a few Twitter followers, something in the range of 60 or 70. And I thought, oh, well, that's some pretty good progress. So I kind of ran with it. And about 6 weeks later, we organized the first meetup where 6 of us met at a pub called Fiddler's Courtyard. And we just kind of talked local soccer and how excited we were for it. And it just kind of took off from there.
That was for the 2015 season, Sean. And obviously the Foot Soldiers grew from 2015 until the arrival of the CPL for 2019. So how did the dynamic of the supporters group change when Cavalry arrived? And what was it like to adjust from being a supporters group for Foothills to becoming a supporters group for this new CPL team?
I remember as Cavalry were announced, we kind of talked, okay, how do we want to take this? Do we want to be a Foothills supporters group, or do we want to pivot to Cavalry? And I think it was unanimous that we wanted to pivot to Calgary or Cavalry, as they were the highest level of local soccer. So I remember we grew a little bit from the time they were announced until through that fall and into the winter. And I remember we had a meeting in early 2019. The club promoted it, and Tommy came by, and I want to say Marco Carducci came by as well to our meetup. It was kind of during that night where I looked around and there were dozens of people I didn't know. And so I kind of remember looking to myself going, okay, so I think we've arrived. And so we really just kind of took off from there.
Being one of the original members, what would be one of the more memorable moments that you can recall that you had over the years being part of this group?
The one that sticks out for me is that first away trip to Edmonton back in, I think it was June 2019. And so it's completely like there was nothing organized. We didn't have any buses or anything like we did last year. We went up to Clarke Stadium, and there's probably about 125 of us. And if you watch the highlights from that first game, you can see one of the sections down at the end just completely red. To me, that just kind of signified that we were a group that, you know, was committed to the team, and it was just one of the most memorable experiences we had going up, being in the away end, in my opinion, out supporting our club compared to the home supporters, and then just going out and enjoying the town afterwards. You know, that to me is one of the most memorable experiences.
Yeah, I think that game was a 3-0 win for Cavalry too. So a great way to get some bragging rights early into that 2019 season.
Yeah, it always helps. There were a lot of wins that first year, and that was probably one of my favorites.
The Foot Soldiers section is obviously section 200, right kind of by the corner flag of the goal on one end of Atco Field. It's kind of become part of the identity of the Foot Soldiers. So how did you manage to secure that spot in the stadium and maintain that space?
Actually, if I'm being honest, the club actually proposed that we go in 200. And the idea was that they wanted us near where the players come out. They wanted it to be, because we're kind of, we're kind of like 12 foot up there. And so it's kind of this, I think they had a vision that as the players come out, you can hear us going crazy from above. And I think they wanted to make that an intimidating atmosphere. And since then, we've actually moved into 201 as well. There's other groups in the area as well. We're kind of a mashup, but we've taken over, I guess it would be the east side from the net all the way over to the players' entrance. So, but it was the club's idea.
I've noticed it really works when like an opposing player is sent off and they have to walk right by you guys.
Yeah, that too, or at halftime. If it's a particularly hostile game, you'll get some good reaction.
The singing, the chanting, the releasing smoke, it's all part of what we've come to expect from the Foot Soldiers and back there in the corner. How do you feel these traditions enhance the atmosphere, and how do you believe they affect the players and the performances of the team?
What we've heard is that it really spurs them on in certain key moments of the game. The smoke, I hesitate to say this, but it's almost kind of like a marketing tool we can use to say, hey guys, come out. This is the atmosphere you get. You get that, you get the singing, the chanting, that type of stuff. It makes for a great visual that we can throw up throughout the week and say, if this is your thing, here's where we are, type of thing. So, I think as in any stadium, it just kind of gives the players that little bit of extra motivation to push on, especially if there's a tough game, it just kind of gives them that little bit of a lift when they're needed.
There's also the element of, it's a very soccer thing with the chanting in particular and the singing and the songs, and maybe some fans who are coming out to Cavalry games who've been to hockey games or lacrosse games, they've never experienced that before, and that might be a new thing for them too. Okay?
Yeah, we've heard that a lot of people get hooked on the atmosphere because it is so different from other sports. The Roughnecks have it maybe a little bit with some of what they're doing, but it's very different than your other Calgary sports where you just kind of sit there and wait for the play to develop. Whereas in soccer, it's as the play is going on, whether it's, an attack or a defend or someone's down, that sort of thing. So we've heard that that atmosphere is really what differentiates Calgary from the rest of the sports in the city.
Yeah. You guys are pretty widely acknowledged by both the players and the coaches. You guys get brought up a lot in the press conferences after each game, and they cite the importance of your presence and your support. How do you maintain a positive relationship with the team, and how do you strike the balance between enthusiastic support and respectful conduct?
I think a lot of it just comes down to, we talk to the players outside of the game, we talk to the club outside of the game. We've just built relationships with them, and so I think from our side, it's there's a lot of passion. Particularly you're starting to see that. Say after the Forge loss last year, where the sentiment wasn't necessarily as positive, or as the season started this year, the sentiment wasn't necessarily as positive, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It means you care, you want the best for this club, but it's just kind of one of those things that just kind of develops. It's like a little community that's developed. The players are pretty open. They'll chat with us outside of the games, and we find that helps build our relationship with them.
Being a supporter, it's time consuming and demanding on your schedule. Like, how does the group stay motivated on a year-to-year basis?
One thing that I think helps is taking a break at the end of the year. So by the time late October, November rolls around, you just kind of step away for a bit. And then once the new year rolls around, you kind of miss it. It's such a long off season. So we tend to just kind of keep the conversation going, and then we'll have some meetups throughout the off season. And I think usually when we have that first winter meetup, that's usually when we're like, oh yeah, we have this passion for this. It's just kind of been put aside as it's as the season's been off. But that kind of builds, and then as the time, the ball drops and the season's ready, I think the passion's back, because we've missed it. It's been 6 months.
So how do you see the supporters group evolving into the future? And do you have any kind of goals for the Foot Soldiers, or does the Foot Soldiers have any goals for how it wants to continue, impacting Cavalry on and off the field?
I think one of the biggest things I've noticed is that there's not just our group, but there are other groups as well. So there's the Ultras behind the net. I think they're still in 200, but they're closer to the net. There's a group in 203. There's a group in 109, and there's sometimes a group in 108 as well. So I think the genesis of the supporters culture is that people, at least in the last maybe 18 months or so, have kind of like moved to the group that they closely identify with. And so, it's not just us anymore. There's others as well. And I think that is part of the evolution of our game, where, you have the folks who are more European in their focus. You have folks that are the English supporters. You have folks that are the Italian supporters. You have folks who are in the main grandstand, but are somewhere between the casual supporters who just kind of react to the play and us who are going all the game long. So I think, to me, a healthy supporter section is one that's kind of aligned in the general goals of what they want, which is just the atmosphere of the games and to support the club and to kind of grow the club in the stands. And whether that's us or other groups, as a whole, as a supporters culture, you just want to see that grow year over year, so that you can watch the game locally and it's not weird. I think that's kind of the where I see that going.
Like, are there any unique traditions or rituals that you observe as a group? And it could be either before a match or after a match or during a match, something that you are willing to share outside the group and let us know what you do.
So outside of, smoke being lit at the start of the games, there's not much I would say in terms of tradition. It's kind of fluid.
Yeah, it developed organically, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So my next question for you, Sean, is probably my last one, but what does it mean to you to be a part of a supporters section personally? And what has kept your passion for supporting the team burning strongly year after year? Because we're getting close to that 10-year mark since the Foot Soldiers first formed. back then it was for the PDL team. But I mean, yeah, kind of in a circular question. What has kept you going personally?
I think what we've really developed is a bit of a community where you have people from all backgrounds, all walks of life in terms of their occupation or their religion or their ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera. All that is thrown out the window, and we all just have a single focus of supporting Cavalry. So we've kind of developed a community where we just get to know each other as people. And I think that's kind of what keeps you going. Like, there's still the soccer, and you're still passionate about that. But you're also passionate about going to the game and seeing your friends and, getting away from the hassles of day-to-day life and doing something you enjoy. So at the end of each year, I find I'm having to take a little bit more time off, given that, it's more, I don't want to say it's more of a grind, but you know what I mean? Like it's not new and fresh anymore. It's an experience that's the same year over year. And so you take some time off and then you miss it just naturally because it's something you care about. And then by the time you get back, you're right back into it.
Yeah, I think that resonates with me just in terms of covering the team. I think I feel the same way. But yeah, awesome. Well, that was my last question for you, Sean. But Jason, is there anything else you'd like to touch upon or mention or ask before we end the interview?
No, I think that should pretty much cover it. I think we hit all the main points and got into the origins and sort of where we are now and what's the future. So yeah, I think is there anything, Sean, that you wanted to add? Any other comments or things you want to mention about the Foot Soldiers?
No, I think I'm just generally very proud of what we've developed. I mean, if you were to compare it to Europe, it probably doesn't seem like any big deal. But, when you see groups like ours, that's massive growth in supporting local soccer that wasn't here even 5 years ago in 2018. It was a pretty small group back then. So just seeing what we have and how far we've come. And I just hope that we are able to keep it going and build a little bit year over year and, until our kids take over.
Before we end this, though, I think, why don't you give us your social media and how we can get a hold of the Foot Soldiers? And if you want to be part of this group and you want more information, how do you do that?
So the best way to get a hold of us is probably through our social media channels. They all have the handle Foot Soldiers SG. So we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, we're on TikTok. I think we're on Threads as well. Reach out to us, DM us. The Facebook group is where a lot of the chat and organization gets started. But any of those mediums, feel free to reach out, and there's always going to be someone who's willing to bring on board.
Thanks again to Sean Clarke of the Foot Soldiers for joining us today. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the season.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks to Sean for giving us some more details about the Foot Soldiers and their whole backstory.
Yeah, it's like I mentioned before running the interview, it's a really impressive story when you look at, how far the Foot Soldiers have come. It started with 6 guys who just wanted to support local soccer, agreeing to meet up at a pub, and now there's all that choreography, all those chants, the smoke they light off after Cavalry goals and things like that. It really is emulating the European style of supporting soccer, and I think they're a big draw. I do really think that people who aren't that familiar with European soccer, they come watch a Cavalry game and they leave, or early into the game, they're looking over and they're like, who are those guys? So yeah, pretty great story.
Yeah, I think they add to the match. And I also like the fact that I feel that it's a lot of genuine support. Sometimes when you look at some of the, I don't know, I don't want to cast any aspersions, but I know that in the Toronto FC community, for example, there have been some problems with some of the supporters thinking that they're hooligans or something. These guys just, they like local soccer and they're fans and they cheer, and it's all just, it is what it is. And I think that's really fantastic.
Yeah. And they've done a lot of community outreach and support of things like Pride, for instance. So it's really, I think the Foot Soldiers are a really great addition to the Calgary soccer community.
So it's time now for our weekly Cavs recap. We'll start with the match last weekend. Forge visited Spruce Meadows on Friday night, and they took a bit of a beating. The Cavs won 3-0. I think I can say without hyperbole, it was the biggest victory the Cavs have ever had against the Hamilton Club.
It is, yeah. I think I was looking this up. I didn't even think that they had beaten Forge by 2 goals before, and then they went and scored a third kind of late in the match. And I thought, yep, that's definitely a record result for Cavalry against Forge. So kudos to Cavalry. That was probably the best I've seen them play since 2019. They were just really clicking.
Forge, like they were just a bit bamboozled by that first goal. And then even on the second goal with Akia, where he opened his account for the club, even on that play, I kind of felt that the Forge defenders were sleeping a little bit. Like it was obviously a great play on his part, on Akio's part, but I still felt that there was a bit of ball watching going on there. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I think Cavalry's press was working well all game, and they really rattled Forge's cages defensively. And then, I mean, they were really clinical in the second half. It was 0-0 at the half, but Cavalry managed to score early into the second half. As mentioned, it was a really slick, definitely choreographed set piece and kind of a tic-tac-toe goal that was just really pleasing to the eye. And Forge, I think they were really rattled by that goal, and afterward they never really looked like themselves, particularly defensively, allowing Cavalry in 2 more times. But no, I mean, all in all, like I said, Cavalry, just one of their best performances I've seen. And I haven't seen every Cavalry game, but I've seen a decent chunk of them, and everyone was clicking. I can't think of a player who had a disappointing performance from Cavalry.
And we had a chance to see something that, I don't think I've ever seen in real life or in a CanPL match. I think I've seen it at some point on TV, but retaking a penalty because the goalkeeper stepped off the line. That was, I knew what happened right away, but yeah, I don't think I'd ever seen that before in person.
Yeah, this was Cavalry's third goal, scored by Fraser Aird. Not exactly sure if it was a clear-cut penalty. Natigny kind of ran into the box the way he does with the ball super fast, and it's kind of hard to tell if he gets tripped up by the defender or maybe by just how quickly he's running. But yeah, the first penalty that Fraser Aird took was a little bit disappointing, but fortunately for him, he had a chance to make amends with a retake. And he did better his second time around to put the ball in the net and win it 3-0 for Cavalry. I don't think the result was in any doubt at this point, but it really put the exclamation point on a strong overall Cavalry performance. As we mentioned last episode, Forge came into this game on a really good run of form with 3 clean sheets in their last 4 games, and Cavalry just pulled them apart not once but 3 times.
Were you surprised that Fraser Aird took the penalty? I was a bit surprised because I just sort of presumed that it would have been one of the forwards, but are you aware of his penalty taking skills per se?
I can't say I'm familiar, and I was also a little bit like, oh, Fraser Aird is taking it. He had just come on. I think Meyer Bevan is their go-to penalty taker, and then he was still suspended for this match. So I think after Bevan, it kind of is a bit of a toss-up between whoever's on and whoever feels confident. And Fraser Aird probably said, hey, look, I'll take it.
All right, well, let's talk about this upcoming week. On Friday evening, the Cavs play again, another Friday evening match, but this one's in Winnipeg, and they're going to take on Valor. And yeah, it's the third meeting of the year between these two clubs. And yeah, Valor has maybe not been quite as high-flying as the Cavs have been recently.
No, Valor is in really poor form at the moment. They actually haven't won in the CPL since June 25th. They're winless in 6 and have 2 points from those 6 matches. So 2 draws and 4 losses. They've only scored 2 goals in those 6 games, and they haven't scored more than 1 goal in a game since their 2-0 win over Forge on June 16th. So they're a bit offensively challenged at the moment, and I'm predicting a pretty strong showing from Cavalry with Meyer Bevan most likely back in the lineup and just coming off that match against Forge. Valor's in 7th place. They've won 3 games in 18 games. They've won 3 of 18 matches. One of those was actually their season opener against York, which was way back in April. One was that result I mentioned against Forge, and then the other one was against Vancouver FC, who are in last place. So even though they're at home this time, I just see Cavalry as the favorites. They've had some really good matches at IG. Is it called IG Stadium or whatever the stadium in Winnipeg is called? They've had some really good results there. So I have a feeling they're going to win this one.
Yeah, hard to argue with that analysis. And I believe it's IG Field. Cavs should feel somewhat confident going into this one.
Yeah, but as we've talked about, CPL this season overall has been very unpredictable with some teams, coming up with big results against clubs that are way higher up the table than they are. So who knows?
We talked a lot about League One Alberta over the last several weeks, and League One Alberta, as we know, is finished for the season. But this past weekend, League One BC played their final matches. I just got doing a little bit of research, and I realized there are quite a few Calgary connections on the League One BC finalist side. So I thought we would just maybe run through a few of them because, I don't know, I thought it was kind of interesting to acknowledge some of these Calgarians who are playing in League One and some of them who, they picked up some hardware this past weekend.
Yeah, BC has always been a good landing spot for talented Calgary soccer players. So I wasn't too surprised to hear that there were some Calgary players kicking around in League One. But when you showed me the extent of kind of your rabbit hole research, I was pretty surprised at how many there were.
Let's start with the women's side, where the Vancouver Whitecaps entry into League One BC, they defeated Unity FC 3-1 in the final. Now, if you're wondering what Unity FC is, it's basically a summer team for Trinity Western University for the most part. But anyway, in this game, 3-1 for the Whitecaps, and I think most notably Kaylee Hunter, who we've mentioned on this podcast several times before, Calgary product, Blizzard product. She scored 2 of the 3 goals for the Whitecaps, including the third one on a penalty kick. The other notable mention on the Whitecaps team is Anna Hauer. She's from Calgary. She didn't play in the final, but she did play in 9 matches this year for the Whitecaps, and she scored 6 goals, which put her third place in the scoring race in the regular season. I'm presuming that she already left for school. She is a freshman at the University of Memphis this year, and she's joining Maya Jones and the other Calgarians there. And on the men's side, the Whitecaps also prevailed. They beat the Victoria Highlanders in a shootout after the match was locked up at 1-1. There were 2 Calgarians on the Whitecaps, Sydney Watuda, I'm sure I got that wrong. Sydney Watuda, he played for New Frontier FC, and Brennan Fierst, and he is an alumnus of the Blizzard. Watuda scored the 1 goal in open play for the Caps, but you look at the Highlanders, and they are just filled with Calgary connections. I found 6 different players that had connections. 5 of them played for Mount Royal last year, and they're Keeson Brooks, David Schaefer, William Libby, Jonathan Walter, and Caden Rogozny. And you may remember, if you're a keen observer of the U Sports draft in the CanPL, he was a Cavs draft pick, I believe, last year. Also, the other connection was Francesco Bartololo. He actually has, I think, kind of sort of retired from soccer as a player for the most part, but he is an assistant coach at University of Northern British Columbia, and I think he has a front office job with the Highlanders as well. And of course, the final connection to the Highlanders is the director of football for them is Thomas Niendorf, and that name goes way back in the whole Calgary soccer world. His connections to Calgary are well known.
Yeah. Thomas was actually a former coach of mine for Chinook Soccer Club for a bit, and he's a huge figure in Calgary soccer, as you mentioned, even though he's been in BC for a big chunk of his coaching career in Canada. He helped launch the careers in Europe for the likes of Owen Hargreaves, Kevin McKenna, Nick Ledgerwood, Lars Hirschfeld, several more names than that too. But he's been in Victoria for probably 5 or 6 years. He has a soccer school out there. He recruits a lot of talented players from all over Canada to come train with him in hopes of landing like a tryout in Europe or a position in the CPL. I believe Gauthier Natigny even was over
Yes.
with Thomas for a period of time. So yeah,
That is true.
yeah, lots of Calgary connections in League One BC's final. And it was cool that you mentioned Francesco Bartolillo. He's a guy I used to play against quite regularly. He was with Villains, I believe, a 1995 born player, and always a very tricky winger. And I knew that he was playing in the PDL for the Highlanders back in the day. He actually scored a goal that really impacted Foothills' playoff run in 2017. That's just kind of a story all on its own. But yeah, anyway, to make my tangent a little bit less long, lots of Calgary connections in League One BC.
So I think we're going to wrap it up for this week. Thank you for listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast by using all the usual podcasting platforms. Head over to our website at yycsoccer.com for more information about how to subscribe or to leave a question or comment. You can also follow us on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, at YYC Soccer 403. Thanks for listening.